Welcome in, everybody, to the TFA Dynasty 101 video series. I'm Robbie Jeffries, along with Tom Corson of the Fantasy Authority. This is the first video in a series that's going to go over the simple question of what is Dynasty Fantasy Football. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell below to get all of the rest of the videos Tom and I will be doing. This is for first-time Dynasty Fantasy Football players or just newer Dynasty players who are trying to get a feel for the game, trying to up their game. We're going to have future videos coming out that'll hit on tips and tricks for Dynasty startups, how to evaluate Dynasty trades, and just a bunch more content, a bunch more videos coming. So we're excited to kick this one off with what is Dynasty Football. Basically, Dynasty Fantasy Football is, in normal leagues, you are redrafting every single year. So you do great, you win the championship, you have a great roster. Well, that roster completely turns over year after year as you draft that new team, which is a ton of fun. I love redraft leagues, but what I love even more is building a dynasty, right? That's the whole purpose of, Dynasty Fantasy Football. So everybody that's on your roster when you first draft, which is called a startup, they stay on your roster year after year as opposed to that redraft. These rosters normally are deeper than your average fantasy football roster. They're probably more like 20 to 25 roster spots deep as opposed to maybe the 14, 15, 16 you see in regular redraft. So, you can plan and dive deeper into these NFL rosters, making sure you're getting younger players and kind of looking at what's going to happen in the future. So that's kind of that dynasty look of you're not just looking at this year, but future years down the road. So dynasty leagues start with a startup draft, and that's basically where all the teams get their entire roster to start it off. So you're going to have 20 to 30 rounds. Depending on your league format, it goes pretty deep. So you get to kind of see some of these players that normally would be on your waiver wire untouched, might break out in future years. Speaking of those players that might break out in future years, the taxi squad, I think, is something to mention with dynasty leagues. That's basically like a practice squad for your dynasty league. It's players that you don't think are ready to take up a full roster spot on your teams, but you still want them on your team. So you have 5 to 10 spots called a taxi squad. So I think this is a great format, Tom. Where can people play Dynasty Fantasy Football?
Yeah, so the most common places that you're going to find Dynasty Leagues are on myfantasyleague.com. I have almost all of my leagues on My Fantasy League. It's easy to customize. You can customize your own homepage. You can also create players. So if you play in a format called Devy, which is you basically draft college players, or a pipeline league where, again, it's college players, you can create them and kind of have like a placeholder. So that's a really cool aspect to My Fantasy League. There's also Sleeper. Sleeper has a really good mobile site. I don't use that anymore. It's all My Fantasy League, but that's a really good one as well. I know a lot of people love that, and they've actually come a really long way as far as where they started from. They have a really good product now. And you can also run some dynasty leagues on regular sites like ESPN and Yahoo. It's a little bit more work for your commissioners. I run a league on CBS. And to tell you the truth, CBS has actually done a really good job with it. They've included draft picks for a couple years out now, which they didn't have before. I know, like, that year-end, suggestion thing that they always do. I always suggested something like that, and they finally came around to doing that. So that's a lot better of an aspect. They don't have placeholders for Devies, though, so that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, I've also heard of Flea Flicker. I've never had a league in there, but there's a lot of places where you can go to actually play Dynasty.
I was going to just touch on real quickly. You talked about Sleeper a little bit, and I think the big difference, and you hit on it really well, that My Fantasy League is completely customizable. You can do tight end premium, you can do half PPR, full PPR, and you can do all these different types of customizations, tons of things. And then the nice thing about Sleeper, and I have a couple of Sleeper leagues, is that it's very user-friendly. Where the knock on My Fantasy League is they don't have great mobile, and you really have to take kind of a little bit of time to get used to My Fantasy League. You have to find out where everything is. But with Sleeper, it's built for mobile. Like, before they actually ran leagues, they were a site where you got your fantasy football information. So that's what I used it for all the way back to like 2015, I think was when they first came out. I was getting all these updates before Bleacher Report did this. What is it, 2 years ago now? I think they've been doing leagues for 2 years.
Yeah.
They started doing leagues, and so now you can do dynasty leagues on there, and it's very just easy, user friendly. Going back to what's so special about Dynasty Fantasy Football and why I think it's even better than redraft is that when after week 16, you're done, right? You're done with fantasy football. You can put it in the rearview mirror. You're not thinking about it again until probably August. Not at all with Dynasty Fantasy Football. You're actually getting hyped for the offseason because there's just so much going on. Your trading gets amped up. Your rookie drafts are going to happen. You're trying to build your team in the offseason for the long haul, right? So that might be offloading older players, trying to acquire younger players. There's that challenge of building that lasting dynasty roster. So, kind of just going over rookie drafts, for example. Most rookie drafts happen after the NFL rookie draft in April, and that's the big part of where you kind of refill these players who have retired. Maybe somebody was a starter and then he got cut from the team. Let's take Devontae Freeman, for example, was a starter with the Falcons, then was basically on the streets until he got picked up by the Giants. How do you fill those spots as your team loses those players? Well, it's through the rookie draft, and that's normally 4 rounds. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5, depending on your depth, how many roster spots you have. But that's basically where you replenish those rosters. And those operate the same way as the NFL draft, where the Super Bowl team picks last, the worst place team picks first. Different dynasty leagues do lotteries. Some, reward picks if you win the consolation bracket. There's a ton of different ways you can set it up. But most of the time, it's a linear draft, unlike your startups, unlike your redraft leagues that are snakes. So when you're picking 12th, you're picking 12th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round.
You always have to plan ahead. You always have to have young players. In redraft, it's tough to take a rookie tight end, but if you take a rookie tight end, you can be willing to wait 3 years for them to develop. So you have to have a lot more patience with it, and that's a really fun aspect to it. And watching those guys actually come through, develop, and hit, it's a lot more rewarding when you do have a guy that you've basically, been high on the entire time and they come through.
Perfect. So, Tom, if someone wants to get started, they're like, this sounds great. How do I get into a dynasty league? What are you suggesting for them?
So the first place I would go is Twitter, because if you just say, hey, I'm looking to get into a league for Dynasty, and you don't care what format, or you say what format, the community is so together where, they'll get you hooked up somewhere. DLF also has a message board where you can, post orphan teams. You can, say you want to get started. Yep, there you go.
Question, Tom.
Go ahead, Robert.
What's DLF?
Oh, that's dynastyleaguefootball.com. That's kind of like the OG, the original gangster, as far as Dynasty Fantasy Football. That's a great resource. If you're going to start looking at Dynasty, you can look at their average draft position. They run mock drafts every single month, so you can kind of see where the trends are. You get a good idea about trade values and whatnot off of the average draft position. Dynasty League Football also has like a trade analyzer, and there's just a couple other places where you can go for trades as well. It's a really good resource. You could also try and turn your regular redraft into a keeper league. I know I did that with a group of my guys. We still kept our redraft. And then I think the last way, well, if you need anything as far as to get started in Dynasty, you can reach out to anybody at Fantasy Authority, Robby or myself, and we'll get you plugged into anywhere you really want to go.
Yeah, definitely. If you're looking for that, comment on the video below. Our Twitter handles are below us. I'm at NFL Robby. He's at Dynasty Infidel. We'd love to get you guys plugged into some leagues. He talked about Dynasty League Football and a lot of what they have going on. They are amazing. They do cost money. I believe they're a $50 yearly subscription. So that is a price point you have to look at. Or just saying, the Fantasy Authority has a ton of content as well, dynasty-wise, that Tom and I are putting out. A bunch of guys are putting out. We're doing mock drafts. We have one coming up here. We're analyzing trades left, right, and center. We're actually going to be having a Dynasty episode coming up talking about our ranks, so you can check that out as well. So, yeah, tons of content coming from us here at the Fantasy Authority. But, Tom, that's basically what we wanted to give everybody for basically explaining what Dynasty Fantasy Football is. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of other videos coming out in this Dynasty 101 video series, everything that you need to build that, that championship for years to come.